My name is Aubrey Schick, and I'll get into a couple more details on my background, a couple slides from here. This conversation or talk today, and I'd love it to be a conversation as much as possible, just because we have so few people. And this is a space that a lot of folks don't really know much about. And so I feel like the way people learn the most about this is by asking questions and clarification. So the original title of this talk was Fundamental Regulatory Strategies for Medical Extended Reality and Wearable Devices, because I figured people are excited about that. And then I changed it to or when software is a medical device. So that could be AR, VR, games, wearables, music. When is software a medical device? And, you know, this might sound like science fiction, except the FDA has been regulating it so long that back in 2016, they changed the definition of a medical device and how it's regulated specifically to align with how they regulate software. And it's not just FDA, it's International Medical Device Regulators Forum has done a lot of work in this space. But the thing to know is that software, video games, AR, VR, music, all have had medical device authorizations. And so what I'm intending to talk about today at a high level, and I'm trying to make this so I can read it without turning around behind me, is, you know, to talk a bit about, so this talk was originally created for medical extended reality. That includes augmented reality, virtual reality, all of the head-worn stuff, as well as, you know, a number of different clients and folks I've worked with are actually using augmented reality on phones to create games for actually treating negative effects of schizophrenia, which might sound wild, but actually I'm aware of multiple different companies doing this. So video games for schizophrenia is actually an established thing. Specific considerations for how FDA thinks about medical extended reality, just for my awareness, how many folks in this room feel that they've done any work in medical extended reality or relate at all to medical extended reality? Okay, we got 1.25.
Whatever you want to call it, extended reality experience in infrastructure, but that's another story.
Okay, that's different.
That's like a
and then
real thing, yeah.
If anybody calling in has experience in medical extended reality, AR, VR to treat medical conditions, do we have anybody? Okay, I'm going to take that as a no. So then this is just going to be interesting because the interesting thing to know, and I guess at this point I'll get into my background. You know, who is Aubrey Schick? So I'm recently out of 4 years at the Food and Drug Administration, where I was a senior digital health advisor. Prior to that, I spent some time both in digital health consulting as well as at Medtronic doing spine surgery robotics. I was head of human robot interaction user experience at a startup called Embodied, where I was doing user experience architecture for conversational agents to treat children with autism spectrum disorder. I spent a bunch of time at Intel working on augmented reality devices along with many other things for enterprise and also lifestyle. Previously started a robotics company also for individuals with autism. You know, alma mater is Carnegie Mellon University, Quality of Life Technology Center, Human Computer Interaction, Social Robotics, Wearables, all the things. Those are the things that folks in the room know. Okay, so I think it's really important to start the conversation with the state of AI in medical devices. So the FDA begrudgingly, painfully, with much manual labor, keeps an ongoing list of how many AI-enabled medical devices have been authorized. As of this morning, that was over 1,200. And it's really important to know that these started authorizing back in the 90s, the mid-90s, with breast cancer screening. So this is any software intended to treat, diagnose, cure, mitigate medical conditions, whether it's running on a device, standalone, or otherwise. And I will tell you, as someone who used to help update this list, it's very manual and ridiculous. And I'm actually amazed that during this administration, they're even still updating it. Just telling you.
Complicated, they don't know what to do.
Yeah, and so, but then comes to medical extended reality, so this is all the head-worn, augmented reality, virtual reality, there are not over 92 medical extended reality authorizations. So this is VR to treat pain. This is VR to treat lazy eye for children with amblyopia, and augmented reality for preoperative planning, cardiac ablation, just all sorts of things. But again, like we're approaching, like we've hit a point where this isn't, you know, an unknown frontier. Like there are a lot of products in this space, and part of why I want to give this talk is to really help people recognize that some of these things aren't science fiction anymore at all. And so I talked a bit about some of these medical extended reality authorizations, everything from preoperative planning, mental health, non-pharmacological adjuncts to managing pain, and also diagnosing different conditions as well. And there are a number of different examples of AR, VR, patient-facing, health provider-facing, surgical, planning, therapeutic, rehabilitation, and testing. And so there are all sorts of, and every time one of these products is authorized, the FDA has to create a new regulation. If there's no precedent, they have to create a new regulation with special controls for how this product remains safe and effective or substantially equivalent.
Now, in this chart, is VR including haptics, or is that a separate?
VR.
It's just visual, or is it also?
So haptics is included in some cases, but it's not taken for granted, right? So you may have some of those modalities. So for example, my husband worked on a surgical robot that had a VR component that had haptic controls, but that is certainly not a part of every system.
Right.
And I just, this is another project that I worked on FDA. I think part of another reason I really wanted to give this talk is to just give, faculty, staff, students awareness of like the cool jobs you can do with degrees like this that you probably didn't expect. Like I definitely never thought I'd be doing this, but one of the things that I did at the FDA was work on these list of questions to consider for both healthcare providers and patients if you want to use medical extended reality either in your practice or in patient care, and what are the questions to discuss and consider. So these are actually printable documents that the FDA created to put up in offices to really facilitate those conversations. We used to offer them in Spanish, but the administration took them down. So just letting you know. So there are certain things to know about medical extended reality patient-facing applications. They're specifically different, have different risk profiles than something that might be used by a healthcare professional in, planning or something like that. So it winds up being a lot of neurological disorders, pain-related telemedicine, virtual care, post-operative and rehabilitation type therapies. The FDA sees specific unique risks to medical extended reality, and things including cyber sickness, collision falls, other discomfort, privacy violations, habitual usage, seizures, inequities. And I think an important thing to consider here these are the things that the FDA has publicly highlighted to manufacturers that they care about when you're developing this product. So when you submit it to FDA and you're like, hey, we'd like an authorization, like we would like to get insurance for this, we would like to, have this in the formulary. These are things that the FDA asks about and has concerns about. And so there are a lot of kind of special considerations in this space. While a lot of other medical devices historically are not using what we would call a general purpose computing platform, right? So the manufacturer of the medical device manufactured the metal, the plastic, the electronics, right? They're responsible for the entire life cycle of the product. With a lot of this, and I'm talking about this in terms of medical extended reality, but this is also true of wearable devices, Apple Watch. There are medical device functions that run on the AirPod Pro. I was actually one of the first policy consults on that file. There are multiple medical device softwares that run on Apple Watch. They're also for Fitbit, which is owned by Google. All of these different hardware products are considered general purpose computing platform, and the software that you're writing is what is regulated as a medical device. So putting that all forward. So again, whether it's a lot of this is framed in terms of medical extended reality, but this is also applicable to another client I have is specifically using music for stroke rehabilitation, and they have competitors. Like, this is not specifically unique. And the sorts of regulatory pathways for these kinds of products are 510K. So a lot of people have heard of a 510K. What that means is there's some kind of predicate product, like I mentioned this, music for stroke rehabilitation. So if there is some sort of similar enough to your product out there, you can use the 510K pathway, and the FDA determines it's substantially equivalent to something else that's safe and effective, goes on the market. The other path for some of these products, and a lot of these products are considered lower risk than, say, like a hip replacement or, an insulin pump. And so there's another kind of lower risk pathway for something where there is no appropriate predicate. You're doing something very, very different. And that is the de novo request. And in that process, the FDA actually creates a new regulation, new special controls to bring this thing to market. Post-market surveillance still applies to all these things. I think that's something that folks don't necessarily realize, that part of FDA authorizing a product and creating those special controls is clarifying like how the public, patients, providers, the company reports on when things aren't working right. And so now the thing that I'm really excited to talk about is some of the digital health policy side of things. And I want to, in case I haven't made it clear, I definitely highly use generative AI to make a lot of pictures here. It was a lot of fun, although the spelling is really questionable. I think it's gotten better. But I think to begin, so I want to pause for a second. Does anybody have any questions, comments, curiosities, either in the room or on the, and I'll go back to the pretty slides so folks aren't distracted. Any thoughts? Go ahead.
Just a really quick one. Part of my VR/AR experience was wearable, sort of peripherals. I'm just sort of curious, how far does it, the policy and regulatory extend into, generic inputs to VR and AR? I mean, or is it just really about the human facing aspects of it versus the human use aspects of it?
It all comes down to the intended use. So I know the answer to your question.
So it's use.
It all comes down to the intended use and whether the inputs from, like, say, a galvanic skin response or haptic interaction or whatever is fundamental to how the software, which the software itself, if you get nothing out of this conversation, software can be a medical device, or software is regulated as a medical device. Like, if you get nothing else, walk away with that. But if the software that has a regulated medical device function needs those specific inputs to function substantially equivalently or safely and effectively, if it's fundamental to the intended use, then the software functionality, firmware functionality of those peripherals are part of the review process. And the FDA uses something called the multiple function policy to review all of those different components and data streams and their impact on either treating, diagnosing, curing, mitigating, et cetera.
It's a matrix, it sounds like. Yes.
Yes. And in some cases, if the product does not have, like, if it's considered optional or it doesn't have a meaningful impact on the outcome, then it doesn't necessarily need to be considered. Most of the time they're considered. If it's part of the intended use, they're considered.
A very, very thorough answer. Thank you, Aubrey. I just wanted to mention one thing. It sounds like also that it's just sensors themselves. So you have all these different types of technology that can fit into the matrix that you described.
For sure. And I mean, when it comes down to it, you know, a lot of things can be a medical device. So this is the legal definition of a medical device from section 2018 of the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act. And this is also as in 2016. So, but the part that really matters here, instrument, apparatus, implement, machine, contrivance, implant, in vitro reagent, or other similar related article, including a component or part or accessory, which is, and we can skip the first part, and just focus on intended for use in the diagnosis of disease or other conditions. Other conditions is a big deal. I was on a file where the device was intended to detect marijuana impairment. So this was a software intended to detect marijuana impairment, right? And that's considered an other condition, right? Or used in the cure, mitigation, treatment, or prevention of disease.
So your advertisement has to say not intended for these things.
Correct. Correct, exactly. And so if you don't want to be regulated, you have to clarify that you're not a medical device. And again, back in, I think it was 2021, I believe it was the end of 2021, they actually amended the definition of intended use to include all circumstances of distribution. So if you've got an influencer who's saying that your product cured their XYZ, but your authorization doesn't say that your product cures the XYZ, you are still responsible for that, right? And so a big thing that I do today, so I'm no longer at the FDA, I'm now a regulatory consultant, which I myself wonder what that means from time to time. But the big thing that means is that I'm helping companies, largely startups, but also big companies, maintain the level of regulatory oversight that they would like to. So to align their regulatory strategy and their product strategy. And a lot of that is helping them with marketing, helping them with user interfaces, to just really observe the policies I'm about to run through.
Did I understand you to say that if an influencer says my product cures XYZ, I'm responsible for
Correct.
that person
Yes.
who I have no control over?
If you paid them.
Oh, if I paid.
Yeah.
Okay.
Or you provided the thing to
Yeah.
them as a demo.
Yes,
So
yeah,
it's not random asshole wants to take my.
right,
down.
correct, correct.
Although you do have to watch out for those.
You do, allegations,
I think they call this the snake oil.
Yeah.
well, yeah, and that's an issue, you know, there's a client that, actually, I should be careful because this is reported, but there's someone that I worked with really recently who was dealing with an allegation and their product wasn't even on the market yet. But somebody got a screenshot of it and sent their pre-market product to FDA, and FDA is like, hey, looks like you should have an authorization for this. Tell us a little bit more. And then it was a very, very big mess that if their marketing had been different and their user interface had been different, they would not be in the very big, ugly mess that they were in.
That's where you can help.
That is where I can help. That's when.
Poster ex ante.
That's when folks ask me to like drop everything and just take their calls for a week. So I think the thing that's really important to recognize is like, while all sorts of things could possibly be a medical device, all sorts of software could possibly be a medical device, FDA intends to focus its regulatory oversight only on those software functions that are medical devices and whose functionality could pose a risk to patients, and specifically to patient safety if the device were not to function as intended. So again, back in 2016, the 21st Century Cures Act amended the definition of a medical device to exclude certain software functions from the definition, which is why we have this kind of like a bite taken out of the definition of medical device. And that includes certain clinical decision support, certain general wellness, certain medical device data systems. There are a number of things, but I think the best example is clinical decision support. People want to say, my product's clinical decision support. It's not a device. Turns out there's only a very small sliver of clinical decision support that's not regulated. And so if you overstep that boundary, your product's regulated, which is what happened to this particular company that I'm talking about. And so whether that product is intended to be for patients or healthcare providers, whether it provides a recommendation, note the lack of S, versus recommendations totally changes how it's regulated. And that's not very apparent to people. So again, FDA takes this risk-based regulatory approach. On one side, there are these products that aren't even a medical device. They don't meet the definition of a medical device. Then there are things under enforcement discretion. They may legally be medical devices, but since they're low enough risk, they're not really making big claims. FDA is kind of like too busy to even figure out like what they are. And they're like, don't bother us with that. And then there's stuff that's the focus of FDA's regulatory oversight. You need to pursue pre-market authorization. You have to do clinical trials. Evidence data, all these things are really required. And, the companies need to follow associated controls established by the regulation that they're
So
marketing.
10 years ago, IBM with Watson, where did it land here?
So it all depends on the intended use. A lot of people ask us about ChatGPT right now, right?
But
So
it's like, it was being done a
Right.
decade ago.
Yeah, and so ChatGPT is not marketing itself as a medical device. Slingshot AI, if you've heard about it, had originally been marketing themselves, I believe, as like an AI therapist. And they had done extensive work to align on that claim, but they didn't have an FDA authorization. It's now like a AI health coach, right? And so I'm not exactly sure of the words that they're using, but they've specifically remediated all of their marketing to clarify that it is not intended for the treatment, diagnosis, cure, mitigation of medical conditions. And I think a lot of this, folks we have these like magical software skills and we can create these new things and that's really cool. But if you want to make claims that are regulated as a medical device, you have to prove to FDA that it meets that standard. Otherwise, they're going to pull you off the market. So for a lot of folks trying to develop these softwares, there are a lot of unknown unknowns. It's a black box. They're afraid to ask FDA. They don't know how to ask FDA. And so when I originally created this talk, it was about shining some light on how to do that and thinking about the process. And so it really kind of aligning the product life cycle with the regulatory life cycle. So while there are many, many different perspectives on what the product development life cycle is, this is not meant to be exhaustive, definitive. There are also different definitions and perspectives on the regulatory and compliance life cycle, and neither of them are linear. But for the sake of like communicating resources and best practice, we've just kind of forced some linearization here to just kind of help folks think about it and also recognize that there are resources like from the concept phase through the already deployed something on the market phase. And then it was also really important to folks to know that some of these things are optional. The FDA's Q submission process, which is a way to like have a meeting with FDA and talk about what you're doing before you've spent quite so much money and made so big of a mess. It is optional. It's a really bad idea to skip it in most cases, but it's optional technically. So in any event, there are resources throughout the product development life cycle. And that's something that just I wanted to talk about. It sounds like folks here are not necessarily developing stuff in the digital health space, but in the event that we ever want to take these awesome shiny skills that students are developing and get them excited about creating things that could be used for treatment, diagnosis, cure, mitigation of medical conditions or other conditions, there are resources the whole way across. And almost all of these are free / already paid for by your tax dollars. And last I checked, they all still exist, which is kind of magical. And then it's alive. So this is something that I worked on before I left FDA, and I was so sad that it hadn't been published. So this is the big thing here is this is an index. So while FDA had all of these resources for innovators, it was so badly curated that nobody could find them, right? Unless you'd already been in the bowels of the regulatory process, you didn't even know where to begin. And even people who had been through it didn't know what was available. And so I created this thing that, not wholly alone, but I drove a lot of it, that is now called Regulatory Accelerator, which is not a new thing. FDA didn't create anything new. All they did was create a diagram / I created a diagram that indexed these resources that were already there, and they just called it a new program, but whatever. But they published it, and that's exciting. So before it was just like my representation of like, for goodness sake, but it is on the FDA's website. People can use this, and it does align with what I said. So now, to that end, it's important to kind of take this index and recognize that some of these things are tools, like things that you can just use and pick through on your own. Some of them are ways to actually talk to FDA. You can email them, call them, like actually interact with human beings who will help you. And some of this is written guidance. And so I want to step through some of the ones that I think are the most useful throughout the process. So the first one that I'm going to talk about is the Digital Health Policy Navigator. I'm really biased on this one. I built this. This is my first project at FDA. And what this does is it takes all of the core policies related to that 21st Century Cures Act change when they changed the definition of a medical device and how software is regulated. So it asks you little yes or no questions about the functionality of your software to help you understand how it's regulated. It works on mobile, it works on desktop, and as you answer these yes or no questions, it takes you through 7 steps, 7 pages to tell you your product's either likely not a medical device, likely FDA intends to exercise enforcement discretion, this is probably low risk enough, or actually this is probably regulated, you should come in and talk to us. And the fact that we have these cool little icons here, this was like such a fight. Like I want to say there were like 24 iterations of these simple graphics. It was insane, but it's public, it's out there, it's a miracle.
Before you go on, could I ask you about step 1? So I know it's the word intent.
Intended for a medical purpose.
Intended for.
Intended for a medical purpose. So is your software intended for a medical? Intended, yeah, because the FDA regulates things based on their intended use.
So if it's an athletic intent, but, oh, that could help somebody feel well.
Well, so let's see, so there's a great example. Are you folks familiar with the Whoop band, the Whoop fitness band? So the Whoop fitness band, it's intended for general wellness, fitness, help you, you know, as an athlete. However, they created I want to say like a hypertension, like blood pressure monitoring software function. And FDA's like, that goes beyond like general wellness and fitness. That's something that we would regulate as a medical device. And Whoop is like, no, it's for wellness. And FDA specifically publicly posted a warning letter / like they have the right to stop them at the docks. Like it's you can't do that. So there's a big fight going on right now, and I don't know whether Whoop has pulled back that software function.
And it's great that you're going into so much detail. I just wanted to ask this simple question about data. You know, software and devices always generates or uses, or, you know, there's a data ecosystem. That is not something that you can find holistically at FDA. You'll have to dive down into each of these sort of, if you will, silos. Is that correct? You know,
Well,
like for each device, each manufacturer, each, you know, so there's a very much a specialized treatment of data of any sort, wherever it comes from.
so there is, you know, an overarching cybersecurity guidance that applies to all device software, right? That everybody has to adhere to. However, it's important to recognize when you think of data, there are many different forms of data, and FDA does not regulate your electronic medical records. That is the jurisdiction of ONC, which no one has heard of, but it's another agency. Last I checked, their website was down due to the shutdown. They're a small team, and so whenever they are creating rulings and such, they tend to reach out to folks like FDA. I did a bunch of drafting on some of their final rules related to the use of AI and AI transparency in your electronic medical records, but that is not FDA's jurisdiction. However, the cybersecurity, the handling of your data, and any data handling that could pose a risk to patients, right? And risk does include information risk. So my colleague that I used to work with would frame risk in terms of meat risk, serious injury or death, or information risk, delayed care, or otherwise, potential harms to the patient that are not as direct as serious injury or death.
I just posed the question simply because of the fact that Whoop was saying, no, that blood pressure information, you have to be careful giving that out, or there's a new type of regulation. That's why I asked the data question. It's obviously, well,
Whoop
FDA
was saying that it was intended for wellness purposes, right? And so it wasn't the handling of the data that was the problem. It was FDA was saying that, you know, hypertension, blood pressure, that particular software function went beyond what FDA considered to be general wellness. Interestingly enough, I believe Apple got an authorization for a very similar device software function not too long after that, right? And so there's also a like, hey, if some people are pursuing, let me put it this way, if one person has a product that like I don't know, if you've got a.
let me see if I can help. If there's life and safety issues at the core of, you know, a product or a service or software or device, that's probably where the attorneys at FDA started, sort of try to draw the line. Is maybe that a good way to?
No, and I wish it was, and let me tell you why it's not. It's not because that's the foundation of what's regulated at all. Like if there is no precedent, however, if there is a precedent, if FDA has already regulated something, a great example is computerized behavioral therapy, right? So you have a video game. There's one in particular for the treatment of ADHD that's been authorized. The fact that there's already this authorization for video games to treat ADHD, right? So you have this regulation in place. If you go and create a wellness video game to help you with attention, that's substantially equivalent to something else that the FDA already regulated. The fact that it regulates this other thing, you are now subject to all of the requirements, right? So in the case of Whoop, the fact that there was already a medical device on the market doing what they were doing, they can't just say, yeah, but ours isn't.
So prior art.
Yes.
So if there's a pulse ox out there, you can't make something that has
You
that
can't,
function.
you can't be the general wellness pulse ox.
Yeah.
Yeah, because FDA is already regulating that. So.
And one of the strategies for barrier to entry is to do just that.
Mhm.
Because it takes a lot of effort to do it right and get the right labeling, et cetera, and to monitor it. And then you can't just have whoever lately come along and say, oh, we're doing that too. They have to follow the same thing.
But if, yeah,
So the barrier to entry.
if I have a video game and I'm gonna have this special interface, it's, you gotta get your pulse up to a certain level.
Right.
Yeah, it has to go through.
Yeah, well, and it's all about the claims that you're making,
Right.
and it's complex, right? And yeah, so to continue through, so this is all again, just like in the market research ideation, like you're just, go ahead.
So I thought you said the Whoop was denied, but.
Denied isn't the word, they were sent a warning letter.
Okay,
They
so-
were told that their software is a medical device that needs an authorization and they are not allowed to market it.
And that was before Apple got approval.
Very briefly before.
Yeah, for what it's worth, that's called.
In federal speak, but FDA was already regulating other kind of hypertension,
Okay, so that's why. the
yes,
precedence was
yes,
the
yeah,
regulation of
correct.
other- Okay.
yeah,
So it wasn't because.
yeah, it's
okay.
FDA regulates devices of this type,
Got it.
right?
Okay.
That in this, for this purpose. Yeah, it doesn't have to be exactly the same,
Got it, okay.
so
Kid gloves.
all the things.
Inhibit innovation. That's probably why they said that.
So there was Policy Navigator, Digital Health FAQs. This is an amazing page that just gives you answers to frequently asked questions about developing software for, you know, medical intended uses, purposes, and to help you understand different resources that exist. There's also device advice. So device advice is just what it sounds like. It's an email, it's an inbox as well as a number that you can call. They will respond within 48 hours, which is crazy in federal government time. But they will give you information text-based resources about potential device laws, regulations, and guidances. Having said that, it can be a little incomplete, so it's quick, but it can be imprecise. They don't go super deep on understanding your product before telling you things. But it's, hey, it's great that they're there, and it's not something that gets used against you later.
Is it consistent? One agent compared to
Get
the
the
other?
answer you want by calling back.
Yeah, yeah, and people do that, and worse than that, I'm gonna tell you about some more resources, and some people will reach out to a different inbox because they didn't like the question in the first, or they'll email both inboxes at the same time. Now we have to coordinate the responses, which sometimes works.
Or you'll do a Q-sub meeting on a $30 million development, and then when you actually do it, they say, never mind.
Yep, yes, yeah. Well, yes, and I'll talk about Q subs eventually. We'll get to that. CDRH Learn is this video and presentation repository that has the worst user experience at all. And if you are developing any type of software for digital health purposes, you should feel special because it's buried under specialty topics. So you can't even control F for digital health. You won't find it. You've got to go down into specialty topics, open the accordion, and then you can find really nice training modules on digital health. But most people don't know they're there. So if you're developing artificial intelligence, you might want to check out predetermined change control plans. A lot of people don't even know what that is.
So is the moral for this, like, have a lot of money and time and energy before you develop it?
I mean, that's the best way to develop a medical device. I will say I work with a lot of folks who are early stages and don't have all those things. The biggest pain is the unknown unknowns,
Yeah.
right? And so, I've seen folks take the approach of, I'm just going to figure this all out myself. And I've seen folks take the approach of, I'm going to pay a consultant to do all of this for me. And both can be valid. Probably a little bit of both is what you actually need to do. But with that, I wanted to kind of end on the digital health inbox. So I used to be one of the people who staffed this inbox. It takes 1 to 2 weeks to respond. Honestly, 2 weeks is a good expectation. But in this instance here, you can give specific information about your product and they will give specific information back, resources, get you on the right track. They take a very conservative approach in terms of they're more likely to tell you your software would be regulated than not. However, if they come back and tell you it's not, or it's enforcement discretion, you're really in the green, right? So they try to paint the guardrails to help you understand the difference between what might be regulated and what might not be, and where this is really valuable. And I think something that's really important for students, innovators, et cetera, is that it can be really helpful to create a software function. Again, when I'm saying this, that could be VR, it could be wearables, it could be whatever, that aligns with the general wellness or enforcement discretion requirements before making device claims. So you can find product market fit with lower risk claims and kind of establish the space before, promising the moon. A lot of the time when folks are fundraising, they want to promise it slices, it dices, it does this, it does that. And that's not a great regulatory strategy. So in any event, all right. So at this point, I'm moving on to the feasibility and risk analysis part of product development. So there are all of these digital health guidances, but there are some that I think are particularly relevant. I mean, I highlighted this in terms of medical extended reality, but again, really applies to all wearables. There's specifically a policy for artificial intelligence enabled medical devices. This is draft. This administration is not going to let this thing go final right now. That draft is as close to a final guidance as you're going to find. My understanding is it's supposed to finalize, but this went out effectively Christmas of the Biden administration. And a lot of people are just using it. The off-the-shelf software guidance. This is something that is almost like a misnomer because the off-the-shelf software guidance is used frequently for off-the-shelf hardware products. So if you're using Apple Watch, you're using Pico, Quest, whatever headsets, you wind up using this kind of off-the-shelf guidance to guide the information for a product for which you do not maintain life cycle control. And so in any event, I always bring that forward for innovators, people new to the space, because it's just important to know about. I'm gonna not get into the details. Some of these things I actually already talked about when Dan asked questions.
So Aubrey, you're doing a great job of convincing us to never, ever, ever work on a medical device. So can you as a bunch of researchers that want to do great things for the world, maybe flip your
Well, you're working on devices, but they could be used for medical things. You have to.
and tell us why the Atlas Institution is working on anything like this instead of don't even get near it.
I feel
Because
like,
that's what I feel after 15 minutes of
okay.
whatever just happened.
I appreciate that. That wasn't really the intent. I mean,
I'm just saying that's what happened.
okay, that's helpful.
Am I the only one feeling that?
Yeah, I spent a lot of money on it.
One's already thinking about the thing that my son's working on at CMU. Well,
Yeah.
let's do this too.
Yeah, well, and also I've got to say, I've been really disappointed as an alumni who gets all the, catalogs and magazines, etc. I've been really disappointed by how FDA has represented, not FDA, CMU has represented its awareness of digital health policy, or rather lack thereof. They just, it seems like a huge gap for a company for a university that is doing so much in that space. And I guess, so to step back and, to respond to Kurt's point, I deeply believe that folks should be taking the opportunity to develop device software functionality, software intended to treat, diagnose, cure, mitigate medical conditions. However, recognizing that boundary case between when something might be an investigational device or, when something's really pre-market versus once something is going to require an authorization and be regulated, I think is really important. And also recognizing that there is that kind of boundary between something that is a medical device and not, and kind of intentionally navigating that. And there are a lot of tools, some of the ones I just went through, to help you understand what are the boundary cases.
No, I think I agree with his point, and I think your response is good. And as a research community, basically the big funders are going to be education, military, and medical. And so the military doesn't care, has none of these constraints. If I can build a better machine for killing people, I don't need to go through it.
Well, and actually we got contacted by the Air Force while I was at FDA. They were doing something for, fatigue and fighter pilots. And our response back was, it turns out being a fighter pilot is not a medical condition.
I like that. People like MITRE they fund the ECTF competition where you're trying to hack in, and 2 years ago was medical devices, and you're send all these kids to see decrypt, break, change, break into these things, and that's the whole competition. So the military does have at least the military contractors have that interest.
Well, and I'll add too, because I think, flipping the argument, I think is, for community. But the Fogarty Innovation Incubator I worked with at Stanford and the whole thing, most of our stuff was this category. And you can navigate it and it works. You just have to know the expectations. Your investors have to know the money it takes to do it. And then you do it. And we've had very good, in fact, Fogarty Innovation would give courses for the FDA. They would
Yes.
come out and do the whole thing, because there's a lot of 2016 saved a lot of known unknowns. So it can be done, and it's great work. And some of the things that are coming, out into the world are just fantastic. So FDA is a great organization. They're doing the best they can. And there's actually some very good guidelines of how to do these things. And we shouldn't be discouraged. We just have to set expectations for ourselves and our investors when we're moving into one of these paths. So I'd just like to say that on behalf of all the citizens that are still here.
Well, and that's a really good point. A lot of folks, they look at software innovation and they think that they're investing in a software company. But if you're investing in a medical device software, you need your timeline, your horizon, your pocketbook has to recognize that you're investing in a medical device, not a consumer software company,
That's right.
which means there are certain opportunities and benefits and very different timelines, constraints. And so it's just, it can be tough. And a lot of folks, they want to understand the path, like, okay, can we make this a general wellness product? Can we make this an enforcement discretion product? Because I'm investing in this consumer software. I don't want to invest in a medical device. And that's a really, and a lot of the time, the innovators up front may not understand, they may think that they're doing non-device clinical decision support, but they're really doing like, cancer diagnosis. And so in any event.
Just really quick to jump in. I won't take any more of your time than I need to, but I wanted to make sure we say a couple of things about software and government regulation and regulatory in general. And I'm not an attorney, but I have lived this process quite dastardly. The bottom line is, when you're talking about software, there's very little software regulation. In a lot of ways, FDA is the frontier for big government to support regulating software. And that's not something that we should be upset about. It's just sort of a reality. Now, that being said, I wanted to make sure you hear one more simple thing. The FCC, when they decided they were stepping on all kinds of innovations, and their Congress critters and people like that figured this out, they went to the FCC and they said, this isn't right, you have to do these things. That hasn't happened yet, as far as I can tell, at the FDA. Is that a true statement?
I got kind of lost.
I think 2016 solved that.
I think so.
Yeah.
I think,
Well, that was solved by the FDA in 2016.
yeah,
So they had people visiting them from the Hill, and they created a solution for those people.
I mean,
We're getting entangled.
let's set that aside. Just, we've got like 3 minutes.
Okay.
So anyways, I blew through a bunch of other resources that exist. I think from the point of view of folks taking pictures of this presentation, take a picture of this slide.
Great work, by the way. Thanks for doing all that.
Really dense and very information.
Yeah.
You must have felt like a hero in some ways when you were doing.
Well, when I put this together, I was fighting so hard, and the fact that it's published now is just a miracle, but they haven't promoted it at all. And so whatever, I'm gonna talk about it.
Well done.
And yeah, so in any event, what I'm doing these days is largely working with early stage and then later early stage companies that are bringing their first product to market, usually enforcement discretion, general wellness, or later stage companies that are bringing digital health products to market, and they're trying to manage their risk. I get to work on, really neat stuff.
What's your experience of the FDA doing what they said they were gonna do in this space with Q subs and that sort of thing?
Yes,
Are they
I mean,
being consistent?
Everybody's complaining about that. I think it's getting worse right now because of the turnover.
Okay.
Right? The
Makes
fact
sense.
that so many of the lead reviewers who spoke up on your Q subs, and the Q subs are like a meeting that you have with FDA to talk about what you're developing, and FDA gives you feedback on what evidence they need for a positive
If you do
authorization.
this, you'll be fine.
If you do this, we'll be happy. And then all of the people who agreed to that have either been fired or otherwise left. And so then you submit your thing to FDA and they're like, we don't like any of this anymore. And I've actually seen it both ways, right? I was talking to a client recently that they're doing like a heart rate functionality on random smartphones, and I'm like, wait, you didn't need to clarify the different version models for your firmware, software, all this stuff. Like the OTS guidance was like a pillar of what we asked for when I was on reviews. And they're like, no, and they didn't constrain them. So for example, that the Apple Watch software files, software function files that I was on, it was really important that it wasn't like cleared in perpetuity through Apple Watch version like 20 bajillion, right? It was like, all right, we're authorized through this constraint. And folks aren't necessarily getting that. I think what's going on is that some of the lead reviewers, and like one of my dear friends, who I think the world of, and I've got to be careful about this, had never been a lead reviewer, but they're so short-staffed that he's doing cardiac reviews, and he will eventually be super qualified. But,
Wow.
he's currently getting a lot of coaching. And so this is a really interesting time to be submitting things to FDA. You saw how many AI-enabled software functions that has probably tripled since my time at the agent, maybe more than that. But again, starting back in the 90s, but we're like hundreds more every year right now. And then, everybody's all concerned about different sorts of locked and unlocked algorithms, but predetermined change control plans are also the law of the land, and people are getting those authorized. There've been like I don't think quite 150 authorizations yet, but like this is just happening, right? And like you're seeing almost 100 medical extended reality apps, right? And like we haven't even, there's not like a special listing for mobile apps and video games for treating medical medical disorders. So anyways,
Oh, I'm exhausted.